Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The Metropolitan Sewer District of St. Louis was created in 1954 by the voters of St. Louis City and County using a provision of the Missouri Constitution. At that time, MSD, which is a political subdivision, not a utility, included the city of St. Louis and a portion of St. Louis County east of what is now Interstate 270. More land was annexed by MSD in 1977. MSD's responsibilities include the interception, collection, and treatment of wastewater and for stormwater management. Today, MSD's area of responsibilities includes 525 square miles. This includes all of St. Louis City and approximately 80% of St. Louis County. Within that area, MSD maintains 9,649 miles of sewers. Some of those lines are new, some were built in the 19th century. LeComb is the spokesman for MSD. He's here today to answer some of our MSD questions. LeComb, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you, Lee. Great to be here.
So you guys have your hands full. It's quite a job that MSD is supposed to do.
Certainly, $4.7 billion is a lot of money by any measure. Particularly over 23 years.
Oh, you're talking about the new thing. I'm just talking about your regular.
Oh, a regular job.
Your regular functions.
It's the fourth largest sewer system in the country. It has its challenges. It's a mammoth creature unto itself that has its own personality, so to speak.
Well, let's just go back. You're familiar with the beginnings of this. So back in 1954, what was life like in the sewer business before MSD's creation?
Well, the majority of sewage going from homes and businesses was being discharged directly into area streams. When we started operations in the mid-1950s, less than 5% of the population that we served was receiving wastewater treatment. And by that I mean you flush your toilet, water goes down a sink, it goes out of your home's plumbing into a main public sewer and goes to a treatment plant. Less than 5% of our population is receiving that type of wastewater treatment. Today, 100% of all wastewater during dry weather goes to treatment plants. So it's certainly been a long march to get there, but it's been the connection and cobbling together of multiple sewer districts that were never designed to be combined into one regional entity.
Mm-hmm. And as I said in the introduction, you've got some of these pipes that came into the MSD system, which were existing at that time in the city of St. Louis that had been built back in the 1890s, is that right?
Some before then, some before when Abraham Lincoln was president. I mean, it's quite fair to say, as in many other older metropolitan areas, you had folks who built and constructed those first sewers, and it's not unfathomable to think that they probably went and fought in the Civil War not long thereafter. So it's a very old system. It's a system that was actually first built here locally in response to a cholera epidemic that broke around in 1849 and killed something like a quarter of the city's population.
See, that's just, you've brought up a good point, and I'm gonna actually, this is from the original document that the, quote, freeholders, which is a fancy way of saying the property owners who decided to organize the system, they wrote a message. Let's see, it's a message from the organizers of the Metropolitan Sewer District to the voters describing why regional sewer district needed to be established. And it said, the reason our sewer problems cannot be handled by city or county separately is simply that most of the industrial, commercial, and residential property in the county is on a comparatively high ground and drains downhill through the city of St. Louis. Since the sewerage runs downhill, its flow must be properly channeled and controlled by one overall authority from its source in the county through various municipalities and through the city of St. Louis to its eventual outlet at the Mississippi River. Health authorities, contractors, engineers, and staff of both the city and the county law departments are in accord that the sewer problems should be handled on a watershed basis rather than according to arbitrary boundaries of city, county, village, and sewer district. And so that was your mandate, right?
That's our mandate, and to this day, to be blunt about it, we don't care about municipal boundaries. We operate on a watershed basis. There are 5 main watersheds within our service area. and each of those watersheds has multiple sub-watersheds, as they're called. And we operate based on those watersheds, not where a particular city boundary is, or county boundary, or West County, North County. We operate based on the drainage of the water.
Well, for those people who never took geography
Sure.
in school, explain what a watershed is.
Well, a watershed is basically the layout of the land when rainwater falls, and as water makes its way towards its lowest point.
Right. So it goes from a hill.
It goes from top to bottom.
Right.
It has a natural pathway that it seeks out, and that is the watershed. And you have a very
So you have five of
we have
these,
5 major
so you
watersheds.
have 5 high spots from which 5 different waters goes down
Correct.
in 5 different
Correct.
directions.
And we're in our region is part of a larger watershed, which is the Mississippi River basin, and so that's obviously a huge watershed. Our 5 are much smaller, but it's how the layout of the land allows water to drain from a rainstorm or any type of water getting into the area.
Mm-hmm. And how many, well, actually it's already here, I don't even need to ask you this question. I see here that the combined sewer overflows discharge 26 billion gallons of sewer water annually, and the sanitary sewers discharge 226 million gallons?
Those aren't our figures. As far as the separate sewer system, that's something we just started to monitor a few years ago. We finally had the technology to do that. But when you look at the amount of sewage that is going in area streams and rivers, it is the billions of gallons with a B. And it is a lot of sewage for moderate to heavy rainstorms that can quite possibly go in area creeks, rivers, and streams.
Now, before we get to that part, I just wanted to ask, the Mississippi River has millions and billions of gallons of water that pass by St. Louis. Do you have any idea of just how much water in a day goes by?
Oh, I'm several hundred million, if not several billion in a day, I'd imagine go by. I mean,
so when you're talking about 1 billion gallons of waste over a year, that's relatively small amount compared to the amount of water to be diluted into.
Certainly your point's well taken in that as the sewage goes into area rivers, as it makes its way to larger water bodies, it's diluted quite a bit, particularly when it discharges into the Mississippi. Now, on the other side of the coin, though, you can make the case that these little brooks and streams that run through neighborhood backyards, past playgrounds, those have sewage in them as well during moderate to heavy rainstorms. And what MSD has really been focused on for the last several decades is how do we get the population as far away from the sewage as possible. So our program, the way it was laid out and approved, we work on eliminating overflows or controlling overflows which impact neighborhoods and population centers most directly. And then as you get closer to the Mississippi, we're utilizing different construction methods, green infrastructure, which is a little bit more cost effective versus what we call gray infrastructure. And so as you move your way towards the Mississippi and those larger waterways, it takes into account that there is a great deal of dilution that takes place. But what we want to do is get people as far away from the sewage as possible, including basement backups.
Right. Now, when I flush a toilet, it goes down a pipe. And as far as I know, it's underground and goes through pipes. At what point is this water or sewage that I've flushed down, it's in this pipe, how does it get into these creeks and streams that you're referring to that are in neighborhoods?
Sure. Essentially, we have what are called overflows that act as relief valves. So too much rainwater will get into either what we call a combined sewer system or the separate sanitary system. Too much rainwater gets into either of those systems and it needs some place to go. So in lieu of potentially tens of thousands of basement backups, over time these overflow points were either installed or they were there already, an artifact of the way the system was first built starting in the 19th century. And these overflow points, in effect, relieve the sewer system, say this combination of rainwater and stormwater going out in area creeks and streams. Now, it's the lesser of two evils, so to speak, versus basement backups. And even with those overflow points, we can have hundreds of basement backups during a particularly heavy rainstorm.
So what you're saying is that sewer is not necessarily dedicated to only waste that comes out of bathrooms, that it somehow it's connected also so that stormwater runoff goes into these things?
It's a great point. And the city of St. Louis and 20-some municipalities in St. Louis County, essentially the eastern third of Mid-County going up to the north, the city and that portion of the county are served by what's called a combined sewer system, and that's our older sewer system.
So this is what you inherited this from 1954?
This is what we inherited from
Right, okay.
pre-1954. And this system it's the older system, and combined system alludes to the fact that both wastewater and stormwater are handled through the same sewer pipe. When the system was first built in the 19th century, there were no treatment plants. We didn't have the type of technology, wasn't even envisioned at that point. And so the water would come through and flush the system out. The rainwater would come down and flush the combined sewer system out, taking the discharge to the river to Pear, Moline Creek, or directly to the Mississippi River. 1930s, 1940s, engineering had progressed and recognized some limitations of the combined sewer system. They built what's called a separate sewer system, meaning that you had a dedicated line for sewage only, for sanitary flows only, separate sanitary system.
And the sealed system that goes right straight to treatment.
Correct. The problem with that, though, was that building methods from the city were carried out to the county on the separate system. And in the city and the near county, on that combined system, you have downspouts that connect to the public sewer system, foundation drains, some pumps, things of that nature, because folks, hey, it's supposed to handle the stormwater, so we channel all the stormwater there. Well, the sanitary system was never built with that type of construction in mind, but those construction methods were carried out into the county. And so that's why we have overflows in the county, because through downspouts and foundation drains and the like, you have a ton of water that's getting into the system during moderate to heavy rainstorms, and that's why the water is getting in there. Though in the separate system, it's surely not by design, but it is what it is, and it's one of the things that we have to fix for the next couple decades.
Now, what is causing, you mentioned basement backups. Is this part of combined or the separate sewer systems that are backing up?
Both.
Both are. And they are backing up because the pipes are not physically large enough to handle the volume of water during heavy rains?
That's correct.
What sort of rain are we talking about? I mean, like an inch, is that enough to start causing problems?
An inch,
or are we talking a couple inches?
An inch could certainly be enough, even as little as a quarter inch. It depends on a number of factors. First of all, how wet is it out? I mean, how much rain have we had in previous weeks? Right now, we've had some very dry weather. So there's going to be a lot of ability of the surrounding landscape to soak up rainwater and takes pressure off of the system. Also depends where does it rain and in what watershed and what angle does the rainstorm come into a watershed makes a difference as well. So it's dependent upon a number of factors, but as I said, even a quarter of an inch falling very lightly could cause overflows if the conditions are right.
Yeah, today is June the 12th that we're taping this, and this will be seen like about in July sometime. So yesterday on the 11th, we had, depending on where you were, anywhere from a quarter inch to like just over an inch. Did you have any problems as a result of that anywhere in your system?
Not that I know of directly, and then I'm sure I could check today and find out that there probably were a few points, quite possibly. I'm sure we probably had some basement backups just given the sheer volume of the rain. You know, there was a 15-20 minute period where it was very, very intense. But it's also quite likely that the impact would not have been that great because it has been so dry out recently.
Would you have the basements that you're referring to, are they the same ones time after time?
You do have some areas where you have chronic basement backups where it becomes, they get like once every other year, once every year in some cases.
Are these like low? I mean,
the
properties are...
More often than not, they're very low.
Like in a hollow
There's something to be said for living at the top and bottom of a hill, and it does offer you some protection living at the top of a hill. But areas where we have the chronic basement backups are traditionally, usually more often than not, in very low areas. And they're really areas where homes should have never been built in the first place. But for whatever reason, different municipalities allowed those homes to be built. But through the consent decree that we have with the federal government now, many of those we're going to have to go in and address directly.
Now let's start from the very beginning about that, because I know you're prepared to talk about the recent vote that just occurred. Before we get there, I want to ask you the question that I told you I was going to ask you before we started. Who is Kathleen Logan Smith?
She is the Executive Director of the Missouri Coalition for the Environment.
And what impact has she had on MSD in recent years?
Well, in 2007, the Environmental Protection Agency in the state of Missouri sued MSD over the state of our sewer system, specifically those overflows that we were just discussing. Such a lawsuit is common in the United States. There are approximately 220 municipalities of some sort that have these issues, and EPA has reached agreements with over 70 of those. So this is quite common. I can name you a host of cities that have gone through a similar process. Not long after EPA and the state of Missouri filed that lawsuit, the Missouri Coalition for the Environment filed as an intervener, and they utilized the resources of Washington University's, I believe it's called the Intergovernmental Environmental Law Clinic. I may have that wrong, but combined they filed on behalf of the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, because in the Clean Water Act there is a provision that allows members of the public or public organizations to sue an agency for violations of the Clean Water Act.
Now I'll ask a really provocative question.
Sure.
When this Missouri Coalition for the Environment first announced that they were planning to file, by the way, they did that first, then it was the EPA that followed them, and then the part that you just said. Did they realize that when they were doing that they were going to cause their neighbors' sewer rates to be jacked from like about $28 a month now to as much as $80 90 months from now?
You'd have to ask them that question. I don't know what their motivations were. I don't know what their discussions were going into it. I can tell you that there's never been any disagreement that work needs to take place. Over the last 20 years, MSD alone has spent over $2.5 billion to eliminate over 350 overflows. So we have been quite aggressive in terms of doing work. When we were first sued, we were really hoping for 30 or 40 more years to do this work. Now someone will say, well, why can't you just fix it? That seems like a long amount of time. Keep in mind, again, the fourth largest sewer system in the United States. When we first began operations in the mid-50s, less than 5% of our population receiving wastewater treatment. Over our lifetime, MSD has taken in 79 separate sewer districts, and they were not built or designed to be combined into one regional entity. Just like we have 97 municipalities in the county, there were multiple sewer districts all built their own rhyme and reason. So we knew there was work that remained even on top of the billions that we had already spent, and we were hoping to be able to continue along the clip that we were, but the lawsuit changed that for us.
What did it look like, or what does it look like when you eliminate one of these overflow areas? What do you do?
In terms of eliminating the overflow itself?
Right, you said you did some eliminating.
You hit on it perfectly earlier. It's about capacity, volume capacity. How much capacity does a sewer have to handle the sewage and rainwater? And in the combined system, it's you don't eliminate all the overflows in the combined system because of the nature of the system. It would just be way too expensive to turn it into a separate system like we have in most of the county. So in the combined system, what you do is you do introduce storage capacity. We're going to be building 3 large tunnels underneath the river to Pear, the longest of which will be 9 miles long, 28 feet in diameter. And that, and combined with green infrastructure, keeps rainwater off of the system. That will get us down from about 50 activations per year of the combined sewer overflows to what we hope about 4. That's what our plan that we presented to the EPA calls for. In the separate system, what you need to do is eliminate those sources of stormwater getting into the separate system. So we need to disconnect downspouts at homes. We need to rehabilitate sewer pipe. We were talking earlier off camera about how we line pipe. That will be an effective tool for us as well. And it's a lot of little things fitting together into providing more capacity or ensuring the capacity you already have.
Now this $4.7 billion worth of work that you're required to do, when you get to the other end of it, our backups are not going to, from what you just said, are not going to be completely eliminated, right? I mean, you hope that most of it is, but it's not going to be.
I never talk in absolutes,
right.
but you know, to the point we made earlier about where there are certain neighborhoods where it's an expectation, at least once a year or once every 5 years, we'd like to make that the rarity, so that basement backup becomes something that you don't plan on, and it truly is some monumental event, rain event happened, and we need to handle it. But make it the exception rather than for what as many as the rule today. The fact of the matter with the combined sewer system is that you're always going to have a rainstorm that comes along and overwhelms the system. Now in the separate system though, you know, I spoke earlier about in the combined system, the Clean Water Act says you need to control those. You need to lower the number of times that those combined sewer overflows activate. In the separate system, we have to eliminate all those overflows. Clean Water Act is very clear on that. They're not allowed. You need to eliminate them. So we need to restore the integrity of that system in the county.
So you're saying people who have gutters and they've taken the gutters and they've aimed them right at or actually lined them up and put them into the sewer. And that's a problem.
That's a problem, and we need to eliminate that.
Right.
And that's going to be a huge part of our work.
How do you find somebody whose roof is collecting water, goes down the downspout,
Sure.
and then into your sewer?
You know, people think of the sewer district, they think of the honeymooners or the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so they don't think of it as being a very sophisticated industry. But there's a lot of technology we apply to identifying problems and developing solutions. We do, some of the work that we do involves smoke testing, where we put smoke into the sewer pipe, and where it comes out at, we can determine where these connections exist. We also have robotic cameras that we use in dye testing and complex computer modeling. So we have a very good grasp on where the problem areas are and what we need to do in those areas. But a lot of it's going to be very grassroots, so to speak, in terms of approaching individual homeowners and saying, hey, can you disconnect your downspouts? And we're going to work out a system where MSD has a role in helping someone do that. If they can't do it themselves, we'll find a way to assist them, or we may do it as part of a project. But it's going to be work that each one of us has to do on our own, on our properties, that are going to benefit our neighbors. Disconnecting your downspout could make the difference between your neighbor having a basement backup or not.
Now, lastly, and then
Sure.
I want to talk about stormwater.
Absolutely.
But, this number that I threw out there of $80 a month, which is something that's supposed to hit in about 90 months, that may not be the high point, correct?
If more regulations come online, it probably won't be. And my experience has been that there are always more regulations that are coming down the pike, and that more often than not, they come with a cost. So the cost figures that have recently been quoted in newspapers, $80 a month with $945 million in bonds, those are accurate, but it's assuming that environmental regulations remain static where they are today.
I'm going to say it because I
Sure,
know you
go
won't
ahead,
say it. These standards are pretty arbitrary.
Well,
I mean, they're just some politician or somebody just goes like, yeah, there's a standard. I mean, I'm a little older than you. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. When I grew up, that was when the river caught on fire. But
right.
never. The point was that they said that Lake Erie was dead. Oh, we'd aged it 100,000 years in just a couple of decades, and it was dead. And the Cuyahoga River was a mess, and there was no fish. And once the Clean Water Act was passed in 1970, in a matter of just a couple of decades, it was like all clean. Fish running around in there. So in other words, we go from here, and now it's down to here, and there was a certain cost to that. But now there are certain people that want to go the rest of the way, and it's going to cost a fortune to catch that last little bit. Am I accurate there?
You are accurate, and it's a very important point that you bring up, because at the end of 23 years, outside of getting sewage out of the small creeks running through backyards and addressing basement backups, which are very important issues, it's very difficult to make any guarantees about what the water quality will be in 23 years. The reason why is because there are bigger sources of pollution out there than just sewer districts. You have urban runoff. When it rains, all that street debris, oil, gas, whatever runs into area creeks and streams. So that's a big impact as well.
Anybody who uses a lawn service sprays their lawn.
Salt in the winter.
Yes.
Salt in the winter.
People who dump their car oil.
Which
I know there's signs that don't do that, but they do it.
But you also have agriculture runoff too. The fertilizer from all farming operations, the waste from cattle and hog operations, and agriculture or non-point source pollution is not as regulated the same way as we are under the Clean Water Act. So the way the enforcement goes is we'll take those who we can identify down to zero or close to zero. But at the end of the day, you're only going to improve water quality if you start addressing those urban and agricultural runoff issues. And push is coming to shove to that point, because scientifically, you do reach a point where you just can't make any more improvements by targeting sewer districts. You need to start identifying the other sources of pollution and working with those folks to mitigate it.
Well, here in the last 5 minutes,
Sure.
we're down to 5, what you're starting to talk about is stormwater runoff. And so talk about, well, that's a big job. Stormwater actually seems to me more difficult than sewer.
It is, because stormwater not many people are impacted by stormwater issues, but those that are impacted quite severely. It's not
Like Rock Hill, those
Rock
guys.
Hill, out of Fishpot Creek a few years ago with erosion.
City, they had somebody washed away.
Yep. And what you have happen in our area is that many municipalities have allowed folks to build in the floodplain many years ago. If you live near a creek or stream, I have to tell you, you are going to be flooded at some point because you live in a floodplain. And it's exactly what's happened up in University City, is that these homes are very near the river de Pere, and every waterway has a natural floodplain. And municipalities over the years have allowed development to take place in these floodplains.
So it's the planning departments of these cities that weren't thinking ahead.
Correct.
And they said, okay, and then they issued building permits in areas where they shouldn't have.
So we need to find a way, and MSD can't do it on its own, but we need to find a way where we start unwinding some of that. And it's not necessarily eliminating the development, but we can use things such as pervious pavements that allow water to percolate through into the ground. Utilizing that, utilizing green infrastructure, you can start addressing some of these issues. But the way MSD is set up, wastewater issues are wastewater issues, and stormwater issues are stormwater issues. And right now, we don't have the same funding that we have for stormwater that we do for wastewater. And it does need to get addressed, though.
You're talking about a huge amount of retrofitting to the land that people live in.
Well, it's, we've been working at this since, as a community, we've been working at this since the 1850s, and certainly it's not something that'll get fixed in a generation, but hopefully we can set the foundation for generations to come.
So when new building goes on, this is when you're talking about putting this, because when you have a roof or when you have a building where rainwater would have gone into grass or, into the soil, it can't anymore. And so you're talking about building sidewalks that actually allow water to go through, or you're talking about letting water go into the ground rather than run along the ground.
Right. I mean, the one thing that we have done a very good job of as really a country, a world, we have paved over so many green spaces. And the rivers that exist today, we've put more and more demand on them. The sewers are in place to drain our neighborhoods and roadways. We're putting more demand on them because we're constantly paving. We've learned over the last 2 years that you can do that differently. You can do that with pervious pavements. You can have green roofs on buildings. Find ways to hold back the water, allow it to percolate back into the earth naturally. And we need to get a little bit back to that.
That's what these retention and detention basins are all about.
Yes, but this is really going a step beyond as well, though. And when we're talking about a green roof, that's one building that we're holding that water back on. But if you can get hundreds of buildings like that with green roofs, it makes a huge difference.
We just have a few, really just a few seconds here. I just have to ask one last question.
Sure.
The bond issue that was just passed in the other day, about a week ago from now, is that going to be enough, really, or are you going to have to go back to voters? And that's
we'll have another rate commission process in 4 years. When the rate commission decided upon this usage of bonds or presenting it to the public, it was done with a lot of public input, and we will do that again in another 3 to 4 years and find out what the rate path is for our community then.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It was great being here.
I've been speaking with Lance LeComb. He's a spokesman for MSD. All of you know what MSD is and what they do. You know that they just passed a bond issue in St. Louis City and County, and you're going to be seeing a whole bunch of rate increases, and don't be surprised. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.